Hello. As you can probably see, we have a special guest for this video, which is a Rode microphone, sponsored to me courtesy of Jeff. Shout out to Jeff. Thank you for updating my audio equipment. Obviously, it's not the cute, fluffy little microphone that all YouTubers seem to use, where they clip it onto something whimsical and then that's just the microphone that they can take around with them. This is like a full big boy. He came with a stand. Unfortunately, I figured out unless I'm very close to the microphone, like I'm a voice actor, it doesn't actually pick up audio that well. And so I can't actually put him on his little stand like this because it's just too far away for me to be able to make the most of the quality of this audio equipment. So I'm going to try it out like this, like I'm a mobile sportscaster, and I'm talking for most of this video anyway. Let's see if it works. If it does, you might see this set up a lot more in future videos. If not, we'll play with something else next time, but you never know if you never try, right? Now, are you like me and have you recently somehow rediscovered your love for Criminal Minds as a TV show that you just binge watch on the side? Because I certainly fell into that hole about a year or two ago, and I started watching it from the very beginning of season 1 all the way up until very recently when I decided to take a break. And I think I got up to the end of season 11. So I was literally in the finale of season 11 and I decided to switch over to The Office. So I'm taking a little break from Criminal Minds right now, but I'm sure I will be going back to it when I feel that I'm ready. And while I was still riding that high, I had this thought where I was like, I wonder if the Criminal Minds team, if the BAU were unsubs, what kind of unsubs would they be? And so I jotted down some notes. And today I'm here to extrapolate upon those notes. Now, obviously, because I am writing these notes about characters that I have seen in the BAU team up until the end of season 11, there's going to be spoilers. So if you are not up until that point and you haven't met everyone yet and you don't want to be spoiled about anything that's going to happen or the kind of people that they are, please click away. For the love of God, use your free will and do not watch this video. I don't want to see any comments being like, you spoiled this thing, thanks for the heads up, whatever. Just don't watch the video if you don't want spoilers up until the end of season 11. Okay. The other disclaimer that I do have to make clear is I think some people like to think about the BAU team as unsubs from the perspective of if this person was in the BAU team and then they snapped because of an accident or because of an incident or because of a trauma and then they became an unsub. And that's not necessarily the angle that I took with this video because I think it's more fun to use your imagination a little bit more and think of it from the perspective of now that I've seen this character and gotten to know them a little bit better as a person on their own. It's basically if they didn't turn out to be good guys, what do I think would be the driving forces for them? I think that's a more interesting character study than just trying to predict what the writers would do if they were to pick one of the characters to become an unsub in the future. All right, with that being said, let's dive into the characters one by one. First off the rank, we have Mr. Aaron Hotchner. He is the leader of the BAU team. And if you know Aaron, the way that he's been depicted on the show is someone who's very staunch, very no nonsense, and very serious. For that reason, I feel like if Hotch was to be portrayed as an unsub in one of the episodes, I feel like his angle would probably be from the perspective of control. So like, you know, how some of the unsubs are all about being in control or having a breakdown due to the loss of control. So maybe they were fired from a job. Like, I think his stressor would be around control. I think it's just in line with the way that he's depicted in the show. In season 2, there was that episode when Reid was abducted and he made them tell him all the things that like were his flaws. And then I think Morgan said that he was a drill sergeant. Like, he was like, yes, I am all of those things.
All right, everybody right now, what's my worst quality?
You're a bully.
I'm a bully.
You can be a drill sergeant sometimes.
Okay, good. I'm all these things.
Like, he is a self-proclaimed control freak. And so I think if there was one area where you could really push it for him to reach a breaking point, I feel like control is a nice general broad theme that you could explore with him as an unsub. On the other hand, obviously his relationship with his family is a huge part of his character as well. So like all of the things that happen with him and Haley and Jack. The other angle that you could possibly look at it from is from the perspective of a typical family annihilator. And that's the type of unsub who goes after families as a cohort instead of one person in the family because they were a surrogate for someone in their past. Like, they're just out to destroy families as a whole. He also, as the leader of the team, has like a family of choice at work as well. So he's kind of embedded in family in both areas of his life very deeply. And a good example of a family annihilator is, I think in season 5, there's an episode called Outfoxed, and it was the one with the family therapist who like would go and assume the position of the head of the family before he basically everyone. I feel like that kind of family annihilator approach might be something that is in line with Hotch as a character. Next is Mr. David Rossi, and he is, I guess, like a second in command in the team. I kind of see him in that perspective. He also has two angles that I couldn't decide between. And for some of these characters, actually, I chose more than one angle, because that's the thing about like using your imagination to think about a character is there's really no right answer. These are just the opportunities that I see for them to further explore if they were to be depicted as an unsub. And for David Rossi, I first thought of like financial embezzlement and fraud, partially because I know that he enjoys the finer things and he's like kind of used to the lifestyle. You can kind of tell based on the way that he interacts with his team, like, oh, I'll buy dinner, I'll only drink really fine wine, I want to have a really good meal. And he has really expensive hobbies. Like I think he said to Tara that he also restores old cars, or he has an interest in old cars, which I think is an expensive hobby. And so if they were to lean into the unsub or criminal side, embezzlement might be one of the stressors or one of the reasons that he pursues the criminal lifestyle. And then the other, obviously, with his history of being from the army, he could also have gone down the PTSD route. His friend Harrison Scott in the show, that easily could have been him as a person that was suffering from PTSD. And there have been unsubs on the show in the past who suffered from PTSD, like in season 7, Jareau Falls. That specifically was depicting a person who, I guess, was suffering from delusion because of PTSD, and he thought he was still in the war, and then as a result was harming innocent bystanders. Like that's another route that I think would be plausible for Rossi to have gone down. Next is Mr. Derek Morgan. Now, Derek is a special one because he actually was the first person that I thought of for me to have started this list. And all of this came about when I was watching his final episode, because he does leave the show. I know a lot of people will say, like, you should go down the Carl Buford route and go down him going after pedophiles and stuff. But again, I'm not thinking about this from the perspective of Derek Morgan has always been the Derek Morgan that we know, and he's from the FBI and he has this background, and therefore he's only going to go after bad guys. Like what I'm trying to do is think about what if Derek Morgan is a bad guy? What I actually see in Derek in terms of his capacity for crime, I think he has a very, very strong capacity for violence, and you don't normally see it a lot in the show until you get to season 11, which is his final season, when he starts getting together with Savannah and thinking about family more seriously and like long-term commitment. Because I feel like on the day-to-day, Derek is really good at regulating his feelings and his anger. And that's a big differentiator between him and the unsubs. Like the unsubs who can't control their rage, can't regulate it, and they need to express it in some other way. He faces so much injustice and so much evil in the world, but he manages to regulate himself and say, you know, like, I'm not going to stoop down to their level and stuff like that. But when they went after Savannah, a lot of the behaviors and his outbursts, I think, really show you how dangerous he can be as a person when he's not in control of his feelings in that way. And I think you see that in other unsubs. In season 2, there's an episode called The Boogeyman where there was a boy, and the little boy was the unsub and he was killing other children, but he couldn't hold in his jealousy against other kids, and he felt like they were stealing his dad away from him, and so he was beating them to death in the forest. And then in season 4, there was an episode called A Shade of Grey, and that again was about a little boy who had his brother, and he had anger control issues, and he basically has these like violent outbursts, and he didn't mean to kill his brother, but they essentially had to commit him because he couldn't control himself. And then in season 9, there was another one, and this isn't really about like anger management problems, but it's an episode called Bully, and it was about this person who had returned to their hometown and they had been bullied in their youth, and so they were going after all the bullies. But the big thing about that episode was the fact that I think the unsub was like beating his bullies to death with their bare hands. And so it's like, I think for Derek is a combination of his penchant for violence, and I think he would be like a bare hands sort of unsub, and maybe for him inability to regulate is what sort of triggers and causes him to have these outbursts and then lead to him becoming an unsub. I think that from a deep-rooted character study perspective also would make sense if I wasn't to go down the Carl Buford route. Now, Mr. Spencer Reid, the person that we've been all waiting for, I think a lot of you will be able to guess what I'm going to say, and I'm sorry it's not a more imaginative route, but really it is the most plausible and I think the most sad outcome that could happen, and that is of course the fact that Spencer has always been afraid about the possibility that he has schizophrenia like his mother, and that it's going to develop at a young age. And so I think for him, the unsub angle, and I split it into two because I do think they're distinct. The first is a path of delusion, which is where someone suffers, I think, a mental break as a result of something that's like a medical condition like a brain tumor that they're not aware of, or like an accident that they were in that physically injures their brain or something like that, and it leads to a psychotic break. So he maybe is not acting in his right mind and he's not aware of it. He's sort of in this delusional state, but he's not able to control it. And that's more of like a sudden snap thing. It's not that he's more susceptible to suffering that, but I think that's in the same vein as the other path that I was gonna go down, which is obviously like mental illness. So if he does end up developing schizophrenia earlier on, or, you know, he develops some other mental illness that impairs his ability to be rational and critical the way that a lot of these unsubs that suffer from mental illness on the show eventually succumb to, I think that is maybe an angle that makes sense for Reid. And 2 examples of schizophrenia actually in the show is in season 6, there's an episode called With Friends Like These, and that is about the unsub who had hallucinated, basically because he has schizophrenia, these people that he had accidentally killed that he was friends with, and they were like goading him into killing people that were real. And then in season 10 there was an episode called Protection, and I think he had a mental break before he had manifested his victims as alive, but that one also is revolving around an unsub who had schizophrenia and was sort of trying to figure out what was real and what wasn't, and it was leading to more deaths and more murders. So I think for Spencer Reid, some kind of mental incapacitation makes sense because it's a big part of his character and the thing that he, I think, is most fearful of and hangs most on his head. So if he was to become an unsub from the very beginning, I think that is an angle that makes sense for him. Miss Jennifer Jareau. I know that a lot of you are probably going to want me to go down the kids angle because I know like her kids are such a big deal to her and they're such a big part of her character. But I didn't because I think they're a better fit for Kate. And forgive me for not going down the children angle with JJ. I have other angles that I think are still plausible, bear with me, but I didn't want to just go down the basic one and not explore other options. So I think actually originally what I had in mind for JJ was an emotional manipulator. And this is not really in line with the whole, like, if they were originally an unsub and was never in the BAU, how would it go about? Like, I did include a lot of JJ's training in the BAU and the Pentagon, but I do also think that without those kinds of experiences, there's still the capacity for her as a strong communicator, as a person who understands other people easily and is an empath. I think she would have still gone down that path in some capacity. She maybe just wouldn't have had like the formal training with the FBI. So I think I'm going to say what I'm about to say, but just bear in mind that it would still apply even if it wasn't formally with the government. I feel like the evidence that we've seen on the show is JJ is a master interrogator. She is originally and still to some capacity a public relations liaison. She's extremely good at that. And she went to the Pentagon for it. Like, if anyone's going to train you to be extremely proficient at talking to people, managing their feelings, getting them to do what you want, it's probably going to be the Pentagon or the CIA or the FBI. And so I think there's an unexplored, untapped area for someone like JJ to sort of go down the emotional manipulation route. And what does emotional manipulation look like with an unsub? The one thing that I could kind of think of is the kind of unsub that likes to insert themselves into the investigation and sort of portray themselves as a victim or as an important person. And one of the examples is in season 8, there's an episode called Supply and Demand. And that's the one with the human trafficking ring where the undercover cop is part of it to try and uncover the human trafficking ring, but I think she gets trapped and she's not able to escape and they're looking for her. And the leader of the human trafficking ring turns out to be one of the other girls in the cage, but she like implants herself in with the victims to try and like manage their attempts to escape and stuff like that. And I think her name was Lucy. So I feel like JJ as an unsub could be someone who kind of thrives off doing that and controlling things from within the inside, because she would be underestimated, she would be incredibly capable, and she would be one of those masterminds, I think, who you find out at the end, you're like, oh my God, it was this person all along. I did also read online, some people put forward the idea that she would kind of be an angel of death angle, so those like mercy killing types of unsubs. And while I understand where they're coming from, I don't necessarily see a compulsion for her to feel needed. Like, I don't think that's a big part of her character. And I feel like a lot of unsubs that take that angle of being like an angel of mercy, or those I forget what they're called, but those unsubs who will create a disaster so that they can be the hero, I don't really see her as a person that leans in that way. I mean, an example maybe would be like in season 3, there's an episode called A Higher Power. And that's the one with the guy who was going to support groups for people with survivor's guilt and then doing like mercy suicides for them because he thought that they actually didn't think that they deserved to have survived. Like, that delusion maybe, but I don't really see that being like a JJ thing. I think that maybe is something that is possible. It's possible to think that JJ could have done it, but the inverse is not true. Like I don't think it makes sense for JJ to pursue those types of crimes because of her character. I don't know if that made any sense, but I hope you understand. Miss Penelope Garcia, our resident hacker. This one I do have to go down the obvious route because there's not a heap of other aspects to her character that is as strongly reflected. But I'm going to start with the one that I originally was thinking before the very obvious route, which is actually stalking. I feel like if Garcia was an unsub, stalking would be like a really big part of her character because not only does a lot of her job involve like surveillance and digging into people and trying to understand everything that you can about a person before you act on them, there's also like, I think for her as a character, such a passion for the people that she cares about. So like she has such close relationships with people in the team and she's just a person that has so much love to give. I think that very easily like overzealously translates into the obsession that you see with people that end up stalking their victims and acting on those delusions. And in terms of examples, unfortunately, there is a lot of stalking on the show. And part of that is due to the fact that for a lot of unsubs, no matter your eventual crime, stalking is a part of just general due diligence that needs to be done if you want to execute a murder and get away with it. So I've tried to pick female unsubs where stalking or a strong relationship is a big part of their MO as examples. So in season 1, there's an episode called Somebody's Watching, and that's the one with Amber Heard where she plays the movie star that Spencer Reid like has a thing with. But her character Lila has a stalker on the show, and like that stalker unsub I think is like what I mean when I say I feel like Garcia could have been an unsub that was a stalker. In season 6, there's an episode called Today I Do, and that's the creepy one where there's a lady who basically abducts another woman and like forces her to be friends with her. She does it in a way where she basically makes the victim dependent on her, and then it's like, you can't live without me and I'm the center of your world. So that one's kind of more like a forcible relationship, which I think does kind of align with the way that Garcia maybe sees the people in her life and the relationships that she has. So if she has a delusion about, hey, this person is my best friend, and then maybe that person acts out of line to that, she could snap and go down that path in that way. And obviously there is the infamous season 8 Zux Wang, which I think is stalking to an extent, but it is again like an amalgamation of stalking and intense infatuation with one singular person. Again, you can kind of see what I mean when I say if Garcia was an unsub, she would probably be the kind of unsub where there's like a fascination with a specific person, fixation on the relationship that they have, and like going about with stalking to try and obtain as much information about this person as possible and to like manage the relationship in line with their expectations. The other angle, obviously, is hacking. This is pretty self-explanatory. She is a tech whiz. I would like for her to have a more interesting hacking story than just like, she hacked into the Pentagon. Oh no, we must catch her. There's two, I think, like notable hackers on the show, both in season 10. The first one is the Mirror Man episode. It's the hashtag killer guy. He's not really like a major hacker. He's more of like a photoshopper, I guess. And then the other one is the episode called 1,000 Suns, and that's the one with the guy who was bringing down planes, basically by hacking into their wireframe. That one I think is more interesting, but I think less relevant for Garcia because it's like she has no fascination with Oppenheimer or planes. It's just an example of what I mean when I say hacking, like hacking as a means to an end, not so much. Hacking as a part of a wider scheme, I think makes a lot of sense for Garcia. All right, I'm going to swap hands because this hand is cramping. Next is Miss Emily Prentiss. I think this goes without saying. She would obviously be a character of espionage. Again, she has all of the training. She has the network. The only thing that's missing really is the motive to be an international criminal. The best parallel I can draw for you is basically her arch nemesis Ian Doyle throughout season 6 and 7. Like if you flipped her character to be that of a villain and not a hero and she was an unsub, she would basically just be an international crime ring leader or spy, and they would be chasing her across the globe to try and bring her to justice. Pretty straightforward angle for her from that perspective. I did go down the really basic route, but like I think it was such a big part, especially with the reveal of like her past and then her faking her death for it, and that was the reason she left the show. Like it's such a big arc in her character. You can't really look over it in this instance. I know I'm kind of going back on what I'm saying before, but look, these are the ones that I picked for the characters. If you have better ideas, I would love to hear them in the comments, okay? Okay, next we're going to go on to characters that I think are not side characters, but they either were guest characters or they've since left the show. And I'm going to try and do them in reverse chronological order, I think. So the first person we're going to do is Miss Tara Lewis. She is a forensic psychologist. So basically what I picked for her is in line with her profession, and that is psychological torture. I think if Dr. Lewis was an unsub, she would be the kind of unsub that aims for psychological impact and pain and trauma as opposed to like destruction, basically. I mean, who better to break human psychology than someone who's a specialist in it? And the best example I can give of that is in season 4, there's an episode called North Marmon. And that's the one where JJ has to go back to the small town and there's like 3 girls abducted. And the unsub basically locked them in this basement and was like, you guys have to pick one of you to die. And then you have to do the act. So the 3 of them were forced to not like battle royale it, because I think one of the girls was really, really sick. But the biggest thing about that unsub was the fact that he actually let the other 2 girls go once they made their decision. And the psychological torture in that aspect, as the victims, you have to live with the fact that you also became a murderer in that moment. And like the impact is forever for those people. And so I think for Tara, the psychological torment aspect of it would be a big part for her as an unsub. Next is Miss Kate Callahan, the person who I allocated child cases to as an unsub. I think for Kate, there was a really big aspect of her character that was her relationship with her niece and then her eventual pregnancy and her feelings around being a mother herself. And so I think even though children-related abduction unsub tendencies makes sense for JJ, I think it makes more sense for Kate because that's such a huge part of Kate's character in the very short period of time that we knew her, and there wasn't really too much else for me to go on with. And so I wanted to give JJ a little bit more nuance, and I wanted to give Kate the thing that was really big for her story arc. I think for her specifically, it would be like child abduction, which is basically what happened to her niece. But specifically, I think the kind of unsubs where they're abducting children because they mistaking them for their own children that they've lost, or they think that they're saving these kids from something. I think that specific type of female unsub is the right type of archetype for Kate. For example, in season 4, there's an episode called The Instincts, I think. And it's the one where there was a woman who was basically abducting, I think she abducted one child, or maybe she was abducting children because she had lost her own kid and she was mistaking these kids for her own. And I think that for Kate, like losing a child in the very beginning would be such a huge hit for her that she maybe would have never recovered from it, or it could have stemmed from something else and it could have snowballed from there easily. So I think for Kate, if she was an unsub, child abduction, definitely. Next is Alex Blake. She is, I think, a linguistics professor. And so for her, I really wanted there to be sort of a literary aspect. At first, I was thinking like it'd be cool if she was an unsub who kind of utilized allegory as a big way. But I know on the show, a lot of the unsubs that take an allegory approach is usually in connection to something religious. And I don't think she's necessarily a very religious character. And so if you can think of it from the perspective of a non-religious but allegory-based approach to crimes, I think that's more in line with what I had in mind. Or I think maybe what could work is where there's an element where there's specific words being used for specific reasons, and it reveals things about the unsub's motivations or their history, and that's kind of how they track them down. I think that would also work. Basically any case that she was pivotal in solving on the show, where she was like, linguistically, this person said this because of that, or this word means this and is only used in this region. Like, I think that kind of approach already puts those cases in parallel to the kinds of cases that she may be involved in as an unsub. But other more prominent examples include the Fisher King in season 1, which is where this guy was using the legend of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table to engage the FBI because he believes they can play a role in saving his daughter. And in season 8, there is an episode called The Gathering, which is where there is a writing group and there's like killers involved there, but there is an aspect of their writing to be done and that's part of the crime. Like, I think those kinds of angles could ultimately work for Alex if she was an unsub. Next is Miss Elle Greenaway. I think you're all thinking what I'm thinking, and I'm going to agree with you because I do think it is the right angle for her. She, I think, as an unsub, would be the kind of unsub that plays like that woman scorned vigilante character, which is kind of where she was headed anyway on the show before she left. But I think she would be the kind of character where she experienced an injustice herself, or she is doing it on behalf of women who experienced injustice anywhere. And two good examples is in season 4, there's a character called Megan Kane in the episode Pleasure is My Business. And I think on the internet, Megan Kane is a very popular character because of her motivations and her backstory and everything. And I think that is quite in alignment with the kind of person that Elle is. And then in season 9, there's an episode called What Happens in Mecklenburg. And that is the one where there was a woman who was like sexually assaulted way back when she was a freshman, and then she came back for like revenge killings. And that I think also is in line with angle that the writers were going for when I was heading off of the show. I think it was a very interesting angle, and they do explore with a few unsubs since Elle leaves, but I think it would have been way more interesting if they gave Elle like her own little arc as an unsub, or at least for us to be able to see if she left with the team's blessing. I don't know. I just think that Elle deserved a little bit more story before we saw her leave. And the last character is the Mac Daddy-O of all of Criminal Minds, Mr. Gideon himself. This was extremely difficult because it's like, what do you buy the man that has everything, right? I'm not gonna lie, I left this man as question marks for the longest time because I was like, there's nothing that could remotely come close to being perfect for him. But you know what? The world is not perfect. I'm not perfect, and I'm just gonna give it my best shot. And so I think for Gideon, he is basically going to be the kind of unsub who is very intelligent, kind of bold, and very, very, very patient. I feel like this man himself, even when he was working at the BAU, really loved a complex narrative. Like, he really loved getting into the head of the unsub and understanding their entire backstory, like really getting into their motivations and then turning them inside out to be able to catch them that way. I think that was really like his era and his strength, and there's a reason that he left the show. Like, the actor, everything kind of changed from there. I do think he's also the kind of unsub that would not be afraid to deal directly with the FBI, and he'd probably be like a major arc villain like Frank Britkoff that he faced off with in season 2 and George Fourier in season 4 to 5. Like, I think he's just the kind of very methodical, very well thought out mastermind kind of unsub that takes more than one episode to catch and like understand their motivations and their backstory and just how sinister and intimidating they are. I think that's the only way we could really give someone like Gideon a fair play and pay tribute to him as a character on the BAU, is to make sure that if he was introduced as an unsub, he would be the kind of unsub that everyone would remember when it was his time to go. All right, that is everything I have for you today. I really hope you enjoyed my little ramble of basically what was my musings after I had watched 11 straight seasons of Criminal Minds. And my brain had just been bubbling on in the background, watching everyone grow and develop and change throughout the seasons. If I've left anyone out, which I really hope I haven't, I would feel really bad. Let me know in the comments. Or if you think that there are other scenarios or other types of unsubs that the team members could be, please also comment down below, because I would love to hear about the things that I didn't think about and daydream about these alternate lives that they could have had if they were never written as BAU characters and they were written as unsubs in one or multiple episodes instead. All right, as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed not only the video, but the new audio equipment. And I hope to see you in the next video. Bye. Next is Miss Kate Hall. Next is Miss. Why can't I say her name?